It's easy to find in the parking lot. Right. Yeah. It wasn't so fun driving yesterday though. There was a lot of construction all the way through Indiana and Chicago. Not too bad once I got to Wisconsin, but yeah. 6-hour trip turned into 8 hours with construction and accidents and delays, so that's not fun. It's like driving here in the winter. 15-minute trip turned into an hour and a half. That's why I don't like snow. I liked it as a kid, and then once you start driving, I don't like it anymore. And now I don't have to worry about it in Kentucky. We get about 3 inches and it melts the next day, so that's not bad at all.
I think I'll stick with the snow.
What's that?
I'll stick with the snow over the construction.
Oh. Yeah, I think I might too. I don't like construction. Indiana's terrible. You think as a fairly conservative state, they'd be better on their highways. They're probably the worst I've ever been through. They have the same area under construction years on end and don't seem to make any progress whatsoever. So they just have, like if you look at the map for I-65 between Chicago and Indianapolis, already a miserable drive because there's so many semis all the time. Like every 10 miles on there, it's construction zone. It's just, it's a mess. So yeah, I can't wait to do that again next Saturday. That'll be so fun. All right, well, enough complaining. It is good to be back. I missed you guys last year, and glad to be back here again. I always have a fun week while I'm here. I know you guys are probably not thinking the same thing. Like, oh, why did we do this again? But I do have a couple of new ones for you. I could do quite a few new ones. In fact, if you guys know this VBS program, there's videos that come from the teachers. And I don't know if anybody was able to watch those. It was me doing all the videos. So they recorded me doing 5 25-minute videos on what they're learning each of the 5 days. So I thought one of the days we might kind of skim through that. That way you know what the kids are learning. Hopefully you already know what the kids are learning. It's the birth of the Messiah, birth of the Savior, the childhood of the Savior, the ministry of the Savior, the crucifixion and resurrection of the Savior, and the return of the Savior. Those are the 5 days, so they're going to be talking about that. So hopefully you already are aware of those 5 things pretty well. If not, you got to whip your pastor into shape. He should be telling about those things. Oh, all right. Anybody else want to chat for a little bit? I was told by the boss, don't go tell Quarters Hill, that's funny.
Any new stuff going on with the Ark?
We do have new things at the Ark and at the museum. I'll show you a picture in a little bit. In fact, we can do that right now. We can skip ahead. That is our new conservatory at the Creation Museum. So 4 big greenhouses that are themed. The big one that you can see on the background there, kind of in the center of the picture, that's our seasonal house. Right now it's got a bunch of big, I think date palms are going to be in there all the time. It's got, here's a picture of inside of that one. Oh, wait. There's a picture on the inside. And so we call it the Plants of the Bible Conservatory, and there's 3 different greenhouses. One is subtropical, one is Mediterranean, and one is arid, semi-arid. And you'll walk through each of those. At the end of it, we use the crown of thorns plant, or at least some of the different options for the crown of thorns, to share the gospel. Talking about how Jesus wore that crown of thorns, and so that those who believe in him someday will be given the crown of life. And so we contrast those two and use that for the gospel. I don't know why I keep skipping ahead automatically. That's not supposed to be happening. So I don't put timers on my presentation, so I don't know what's happening. Hopefully it's not going to do that the entire presentation. That will drive me crazy. Let me look at something real quick here. Yeah, that's why I must have copied one of the slides from work to put these pictures over the top of, and they have timers on them. But I don't ever do that. Because I talk too long, I don't want them to advance automatically. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, so that's in our the gardens area at the Creation Museum. You can kind of see the museum across the lake in the very top of the picture. There's a playground there on the left that's pretty new. It's been there for about 3 years now. I think this is maybe the third summer. And the zoo area is right out in front of where the conservatory is, and to the right. That's all been refurbished or updated, renovated. We've now got a wallaby walkabout, so you can walk through there with the wallabies, and they're a lot friendlier than the kangaroos down at the Ark. Kangaroos kind of avoid you or just lay in the sun away from the trail, so you can't ever do anything with them. Wallabies will hop right up to you. So that's pretty cool. And we just opened up a butterfly house here. It's just seasonal, so it's only through like September or beginning of October, something like that. And in October or September, we'll be opening up I'll call it a creepy crawly house. So snakes and spiders and other reptiles and things like that a lot of people don't like. So we'll be opening that up in this area too. By the end of the year, we're supposed to be opening a new exhibit in the museum called Radiance, which is dealing with identity as a reflection of God's glory. So we're dealing with the identity issue that's been going on in our culture, but from a biblical perspective. So that's coming by the end of the year. The Ark, there hasn't been a lot of new features at the Ark yet, but one of the pictures you saw here, because it's advanced on me. That one was taken last year, and this was earlier this year. That is that's two buildings connected. The one in the foreground is our Jerusalem model building, which I'm going to be telling you about in a little bit, and the one on the back side of that is our Welcome Center. That's supposed to be opening this year. So by the end of the year, we should have a brand new Welcome Center. If you've been to the Ark before, you get dropped off right in front of the Answer Center, and then you walk to the Ark. Now you're going to get dropped off in front of the Welcome Center, go through the Welcome Center, that's where you get your tickets, all that kind of stuff, and then beyond that you enter the park. And so that'll be a big change starting the end of this year, or sometime later this year. I think October is when it's due. So in addition to that, we've opened our headquarter building. I don't know if you guys heard about that at all, but a couple years ago they bought what used to be like Toyota's North American headquarter building, I think, and it's just a couple minutes east of the Cincinnati airport, which is in northern Kentucky, so it's only about 10 minutes from the Creation Museum. So most of the office have moved out of the museum area and to that area, to the new building, which is huge, and we have a Christian school there, and we still have a lot of space. My team is still in the design studio. Thankfully, I don't want to be in the other building, even though it's got windows all over it, which would be nice, but design studio is kind of laid back. That's where all the artists and fabricators and all those people work. It's just relaxed. So I like being there. Let's see. And we opened in Pigeon Forge 2 weeks ago a planetarium and virtual reality experience called Trip Traveler. So that is a brand new thing down in Pigeon Forge, and we'll be opening up the same thing, I think it's the same, maybe a little bit different, in Branson in a month or two. So yeah, a lot going on for the ministry. Not all of the things, I'm not directly related to a lot of those things, but other than the Radiance exhibit and the conservatory I've been writing stuff for, but the Jerusalem model that I'm heavily involved in. So I'll tell you all about that in 1 minute when we get started. So there's always a lot going on, and we stay pretty busy, which is good. Good job security, at least for me. There's always a lot more to write, and it seems like I never get to do or rarely get to do my day job. I'm always doing stuff for other departments, VIP tours or other things, and but I enjoy it. People ask how it's going, and I'm always busy, but I told somebody earlier that just when you like everything you're doing, it's not really work. So, all right, well, I'm going to go 15 seconds early. I hope that's all right. We already kind of jumped into it a little bit, but I mentioned the Jerusalem model, and I want to tell you a little bit about that as we get started in this talk, because this presentation actually is going to have to do with Jerusalem. This is what my team has been working on for the last, essentially 3 years. So 3 years ago I went to Israel with 3 of our guys, 3 designers. It's a little strange going there with artists because when you go to different places and I'm trying to learn the history because I know I got to teach it, and they're looking at the same rock for 20 minutes trying to figure out how can they fabricate it, how can they make it look exactly like that, and I'm like, guys, we've already looked at that, let's move on. And so I'm going around way ahead of them because I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to teach things, and they're trying to figure out how to make everything. And but it was a lot of fun. That was 3 years ago on our team. Some members of our team have been working on it ever since, and it will be the most accurate, most detailed, most, most archaeologically accurate model of its kind anywhere in the world. It'll be enormous. You can kind of see the size here. Here's another initial concept sketch of it. 38 by 53 feet is what it will be. Has anybody been to Israel before? To there's a big model at the Israel Museum. People will say, is this the biggest one? No, the one at the Israel Museum is bigger, but it's also from a different time. It's from AD 66, so right before the city was destroyed. It had another wall at that point, so it was a bigger city. Theirs is a 1 to 50 scale, ours is a 1 to 100, so ours is half the scale. And I don't mean this in a negative way because that model is really cool, it's very sterile. Everything's made out of the same little stone. It was built in the 60s before the Jews even had access to a lot of the city, and a lot of it was guesswork. So we've been working with the curator there, and when we met with him, he said, I know of like 26 different historical inaccuracies in this one. We're not going to change them because it's a piece of history. You guys can fix it. So ours will be more accurate. But ours will also have about 30,000 little tiny people in there, about this big. Everything to scale, 40,000 plants, shrubs, trees, bushes that are all from the species that grew at that time. And we've got a woman who's making them all by hand, and it's ridiculous watching her work and the stuff she's doing. It's amazing. The level of detail on every piece is it's mind-blowing. It's so complex. I couldn't even explain it to you unless you were in the shop looking at it, and I can tell you how everything's working. I'm just trying to figure out how to clean it, how to do everything they have to work through is just so complicated. I'm glad I don't have to do that part. I just have to come up with the content. So you can see around the model it's split into 3 pieces, but you can see some monitors there. There's going to be 25-ish monitors all the way around. Each of them will be unique to the area that's right in front of you. So it'll be telling you about the archaeology that's taking place there, the things that we found that confirm what Scripture teaches, the different times that biblical events happen in that area right in front of you, all of those things. And you'll even get to interact with about 100 to 125 different people from that time period. In fact, we're setting the model on a certain date in history. I got to pick this one. It's May 22nd, AD 33, so it is 2 days before Pentecost, a week after Jesus ascended. And so anybody that you meet or talk to at that time will be as if they're there getting ready for Pentecost, and other events have just happened. So there would be a few people who might talk about Jesus. Most of them are just going about their daily lives. There are going to be some people who are glad he's gone, and then a couple of people who believe. At that point, there were about 120 believers, according to Acts 2. So you won't run into a lot of them. 120 out of 30,000 or more coming into the city. But you'll have people from all over the empire that are about to hear the gospel just 2 days later when the Holy Spirit comes down. So it's a unique point in history that we get to talk about. And so anyways, that's what my team is doing. We've got the opportunity to put on the VR headset and walk around Jerusalem. We've got it all designed on the computer, so it's pretty cool to be able to do that. And I mentioned before, I'm excited about it, that this will be my favorite project I've ever worked on. I don't think there will be anything close. Don't think of it as another exhibit. It's another attraction at the same scale as the museum or the Ark. And I know our ministry hasn't really wrapped their heads around that yet, but that's what it's going to be. It will draw in so many different people that we haven't had before. People who are interested in Israel that don't really care much about creation, age of the earth, the Noah's Ark, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of people who are very fascinated by the topic of Israel. So they're going to be coming, and it'll be a great opportunity to reach them with what we usually talk about. Anyways, 2 years ago, I defended that. You know how dissertations have to have a really long title? This was mine. I have to read it because I forget it. A historical study of Jerusalem circa AD 33 and its implications on creating an accurate scale model to enable believers to gain a deeper understanding of the New Testament. There. That was my dissertation title. When you are, I think everybody understands this, the more of the background that you understand of the Bible, the better you understand the Bible. Or the better opportunity you're going to have to understand the Bible. You can still misinterpret the text, but the deeper your knowledge is of the background information, the more the Bible will come to life for you as you read it. One of the things people love when they go to Jerusalem is they feel like they're walking where Jesus walked. And that's what I thought the first time I went, until the end of the first day, and we were walking through a little area in the middle called the Jerusalem quarter, or I'm sorry, the fifth quarter, and there's a little well there. It looked like a well, and you could see straight, like they had this window and you could see down, and it said the first century street is about 20 to 25 feet below you. And I realized I was not walking where Jesus walked most of the day. Where he walked was well below me. And a lot of the places they take you to, all of these, the traditional sites, most of them are the wrong places. They were things that were named by, or a lot of them were named by crusaders, and they didn't have any reason for naming things a certain way. They didn't know what they were looking at, and they just called it something. For example, Solomon's Stable, they named, and that is something that is in an area that was built by Herod 1,000 years later. So it's not Solomon's Stable, I can guarantee that. So let's, what I want to do is go through the city of Jerusalem and talk about it with you tonight, and hopefully bring the Bible to life a little bit better as you read, especially the Gospels. We're going to kind of focus on that time period, but of course Jerusalem is the central city in all of Scripture, and even our eternal home is called the New Jerusalem. And God has set his name there, is what it tells us. It is likely the same place as what's mentioned in Genesis 14:18, when Melchizedek, when Abram came back from rescuing Lot, and he met the king of Salem. Most likely that is also Jerusalem. It's called that in the Psalm. Jerusalem is called Salem. So it's very likely the same city. It's called the city of Jebusites. That was conquered by David in 2 Samuel. And then David purchased the threshing floor on Mount Moriah in 2 Samuel 24. So that's where Solomon built the temple in 2 Chronicles 3. It was the capital of the southern kingdom of Judah. And then during Hezekiah's time, it expanded westward. I'll show you a map of it in a little bit. And then it was conquered and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, conquered first and then 19 years later destroyed. And then it was rebuilt. The temple was rebuilt under Zerubbabel. The walls were rebuilt by Nehemiah. That's essentially a quick overview of Jerusalem in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, obviously the wise men visited Herod there when Jesus was very young. Jesus is taken to the temple there at when he's 40 days old. He is there at age 12, which the kids are going to be learning all about that. Jesus' childhood. And major sections of the Gospels take place in Jerusalem, but it doesn't end there. Obviously, Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection were just outside the walls of the city. Jesus ascended from the Mount of Olives, which is just to the east of the city. And then major events in the book of Acts, including Pentecost, Peter and John healing the lame man, the stoning of Stephen, the Jerusalem Council, which is Acts chapter 15, when you had all the elders and the apostles gathered together to try to figure out what to do with the Gentiles who were believing. Do they have to follow the law of Moses in order to be saved and to be faithful Christians? And their answer was no, they don't have to do that. They're Gentiles. They're not under that law. And then Paul was arrested there. So here is a look at the modern city, the modern old city, I'll say. The city of Jerusalem expands much further beyond that to the west and a little bit to the south. But what we call the old city is what's inside of the city walls. That's what's in the picture here. So there's the modern city walls, but in the first century it was very different than that. About half of them are in different places. The ones on the, you can see the Temple Mount up there where the Dome of the Rock is. So that eastern wall, a lot of that was the same. The whole, almost this entire wall on the bottom here was different. The western wall was about the same, and the northern wall was very different. So when you read about Jerusalem in the Bible, that is the Mount of Olives, right there. That is the city of David. So in the Old Testament, when they're talking about Jerusalem, usually it's that. It's just that little tiny ridge until David buys the threshing floor on Mount Moriah. Then Solomon builds the temple there. And then it was expanded to the western hill under Hezekiah, not quite all the way up to where it is today, but they expanded westward. And over time, it would expand, shrink, depending on if they were being conquered or winning their battles. And so here is what Paul Wright said in his illustrated guide to biblical geography. The Lord chose to communicate eternal truths to the mundane things of human life, through normal happenings in fields, at threshing floors, at wave-lapped seashores, in village houses, or along crowded streets. We can better understand God's revelation if we take the time to learn and better appreciate something about the physical context in which the Bible was given. We can be sure that an intentional look at Jesus' land doesn't so much make the Bible come alive, since the Bible already is alive, Hebrews 4:12, as much as it makes us come alive to the Bible. So as I was saying earlier, the better we understand the background, and sometimes that's understanding like the people groups, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots, all those kind of things. It could be understanding the customs, it could be understanding the land itself, which I'm going to show you some passages in a little bit why that's important. Jerome, the guy who translated the Bible into Latin, the Latin Vulgate, in around 400 AD, in his preface to the Book of Chronicles, they had combined it into one. In the same way that they who have seen Athens understand the Greek histories better, so he who has contemplated Judea with his own eyes and knows the sites of ancient cities and knows the names of the places, whether the same or changed, will regard Scripture more lucidly, more clearly. And he's right. So the better we understand that land, the better we can understand certain things in Scripture. And it's a very, very much an overlooked subject. So during my dissertation, I started looking at all of these different textbooks on hermeneutics, how we interpret the Bible, and even books on the New Testament in its world, like there's a newer one, 987 pages long, and it only has 2 paragraphs about geography. Now they talk about how important it is, but they only have 2 paragraphs out of 987 pages. Bernard Graham's book, Protestant Biblical Interpretation, 1 page out of 298 on the topic. An 891-page book by Kostenberger and Patterson, no section on geography at all. Mickelson, which I had that one in seminary, 425 pages interpreting the Bible, 1 long paragraph. Osborne's book, Grant Osborne, Hermeneutical Spiral, which is a real popular one in seminary, 615 pages. He says, it is of inestimable value to have a detailed knowledge of the towns and cities where Jesus or Paul ministered. I completely agree, and he had 1 page on it. Which is, it's strange. But I want to be fair to these guys. It is difficult to cover that in a regular book. If you're writing a book where it's mostly words, if you don't have like detailed maps and you don't have, if you're not able to show elevations, it's hard to cover geography and give detailed descriptions of different places. A lot of times experience is the best teacher, going there and walking the land. Experience the terrain, the climate, the culture. When we got there 3 years ago, that was my second time there, but as soon as we got to the Mount of Olives, or that area, one of the guys looked at me and said, oh, that picture we did for the Borderland activity is way wrong. Because they knew there was a valley coming from the Kidron Valley coming down from the Mount of Olives before Jerusalem, but he kind of drew it like this, and it's like this. Walking Jerusalem is not a walk in the park. It is a lot of elevation. You go from, I'll show you in a little bit, I won't spoil it. So remember Jerome had that comment about those who know the history of the place better will better understand. Well, he was removed from it by about 350 years. We're about 2,000 years and across an ocean. So we're very far removed from that. It's hard to grasp all of those things. So we have modern tools. We can build a physical model, which we're doing. You can have a digital model, which we're also doing. Unfortunately, I wish we could use it, but we can't. There's a Mormon company that is doing a detailed detailed 3-dimensional tour of the Temple Mount with Herod's Temple, and it is exquisite. They're doing such a great job. We've communicated with them, we've talked with them, but we can't partner with them because it's Latter-day Saints. if we just get them converted, then we can use that, and it would be fantastic. But they're doing a great job with it. VR simulation, you can have topographical maps, showing landform and everything. You have illustrations, photographs. So when we talk about biblical geography, we got to know the terrain, and Israel, the biblical land, for the most part, Israel. There's, of course, it goes to Egypt and a few other places, especially by Paul's journeys going into Europe. But in Israel, you've got the coastal plain, the Shephelah, which are the lowlands, the hill country, and the Jordan Rift Valley. And you can see all of those there. So the Shephelah is so you have the coastal plain, obviously, on the left, which is up against the Mediterranean Sea. The Shephelah is the lowlands, then you've got the mountains, Judean mountains, and then you've got the Rift Valley, is where the Jordan River is, the Dead Sea, the lowest spot on Earth. Is down there. In fact, well, I'll say that too. I'm going to show you a picture of it. But also, when you understand the terrain, you understand some of the military strategies that are taking place in the Bible. Why there's certain times battles are mentioned with lots of chariots, and other times no chariots. There's very few battles ever having chariots around Jerusalem. Why? Because this is the land around Jerusalem. You have to go up, in order to get to Jerusalem, you have to go through, there's 5 different valleys that you can take to get up there, but the Jews had fortified cities at the end of each one of those valleys. And you'd have to conquer all 5 of those cities before you went in up those valleys. Why? Because if you conquered one of them and tried to go in, they would come from the other one and trap you in that valley. So you'd have to go through and wipe out all 5 of those cities before you could actually go up to approach Jerusalem. You didn't attack it from the Dead Sea, because it is so dry, and to move an army through there and then coming up this huge hill or mountain to get to Jerusalem, it's very difficult to do. So, but the battles where they do describe chariots are usually by the coastal plains, because it's a lot flatter there. So you'll pick up on that as you read the Old Testament. Now, this is the topographical map of Jerusalem. North is to the I'm looking at to the right, so it's going to be this way. And that place where it says Mount Zion, that's not the right name. That's one of those traditional things that get called that as well. That's the Western Hill. But this is a good topographical map. You can see the Kidron Valley there on the bottom, so that would be the east side. And Mount Moriah is where the temple was, and where the Dome of the Rock sits now. The Hinnom Valley on the left side and going around the north side, on the south side and going around the west side. Turn around a little bit here. That is in the New Testament. So the Old Testament, that's where you had a couple of the kings, I think Asa was one of them, who sacrificed their sons, passed their sons through the fire in the Valley of Hinnom. In the New Testament, the term is used several times in the Gospels. It's the word Gehenna, and it's the word that in our English translation a lot of times translated as hell. And so a lot of times what they're describing, the word they're using is this valley that was thought to be like this continual burning garbage dump. So that's on the south side and the west side. If you were to go from down there, that's where the Pool of Siloam is, that's the lowest point in the city of Jerusalem. You go from there to the western gate, the Jaffa gate. You are going up 600 feet in elevation. So that's what it's like to walk around Jerusalem. Like I said before, it's not a walk in the park. And even that middle valley, you can see there's European Valley, that is largely filled in because of all of the destruction layers over the years. There's still a bit of a valley there, but it's not like it once was. So what we're building in our model is actually going down to the level of the first century. It's not what you see today. And I think I've got some illustrations of that. So the climate plays a big role when you're talking about geography. So the Rift Valley, which is where the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, is extremely dry and hot. There's a shot of the Dead Sea from Masada. And the coastal and northern areas enjoy a Mediterranean climate. So hot, dry summers, but wet winters. This is Mediterranean, so that is Caesarea. And that little place right there on the right where the tents over the top will look like tent is a really good place to eat. Because you're sitting right next to the Mediterranean. They used to have the best burgers around. They taste like American burgers, but because of COVID, they had to shut that part down. They had to go kosher, so I didn't get to have a good burger the second time. I was pretty disappointed. Anyways, the hill country is semi-arid, and by semi-arid, that's what we mean. So that, looking toward Bethlehem from the Herodium, it's still pretty dry, but that's the hill country. So that knowledge can help us guard against errors that people promote. So one of the things you guys have probably heard before, this is by Alexander Hislop. He said, talking about the timing of Jesus' birth, he said, what is recorded there implies that at what time soever his birth took place, it could not have been on the 25th of December. Though the heat of the day be considerable, the cold of the night from December to February is very piercing. Okay, I don't know that the guy had ever been to Israel. He was a Scottish minister, and yes, in Scotland, the cold of the night is very piercing, like it is here in Wisconsin. They're even further north than we are. In Israel, not so much. So here's a picture of, oh, look at that guy in blue. That's me in Bethlehem in December, walking around in a t-shirt. I do have a sweatshirt just in case it got cold. Here's me at night at the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, and just wearing a sweatshirt. Oh, and there's Casey, so she said hi. But how do we know that this is December? Well, take a look right there. That is the menorah for Hanukkah. We got there on the first day of Hanukkah. That is in December. It gets down to like the, oh, I've got the temperatures here. So Bethlehem's average minimum temperature in December, minimum temperature, 47.3 degrees Fahrenheit. You think you guys can handle that? Okay, it's not very piercing. So Jacob watched Laban's flocks overnight in the cooler climate of Haran. So when he fled from where he went north, and it was in a climate that's a little bit cooler. And he even talked, when he confronted Laban about it, he talked about changing his ways and all. And he said, "I watched your flock during by the heat of the day and frost by night." So they were still out with their sheep even when there was frost. So you can't say, we know it wasn't December 25th because it was too cold. That's just a dumb argument. I'm not arguing for December 25th. I'm just saying don't use that as an argument against it. It's pretty silly. They can be out there at that time. In fact, I got pictures of sheep in December on the hillsides when I was there. So, all right, the topography, also when we know the landforms, it helps us understand passages like this. It tells us Festus went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. But when we look on the map, you have Jerusalem there, Caesarea there. You wouldn't say you went up to Jerusalem, you'd say you went down, right? Like if you guys were going to, I'm not sure what you want to, but from here, if you were going to go to Minneapolis, you'd say, we're going up to Minneapolis, right? You wouldn't say down. Well, why do they say up? Because you're going from sea level to Jerusalem, which is at 2,500 feet of elevation. So you're going up a lot. They truly were going up. They didn't think in terms of a map with north on the top like we think of. They were thinking in terms of just walking, like if you were in basketball, you might say you're going up to Maple Ridge. Why? Because you have to go up. And you're not thinking of it in terms of where is this on the map? Oh, it's west. That's not what you're thinking. You're just thinking it's up the hill. So that's what's going on here. The same sort of thing. Jesus spoke of a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Well, that is exactly what happened if you go from Jerusalem to Jericho. In fact, if you go over the Mount of Olives on the road there, as soon as you get over the top of the Mount of Olives, you can pretty much take your foot off the accelerator and coast for the next 15 miles. Because you're going down from 2,500 feet above sea level to 846 feet below sea level. So you just keep on going down. That's why armies didn't come through that direction. So, yeah, so they truly were going down. That's what those passages, when you understand the landforms, that make a lot more sense. So some of the challenges we have to try to reconstruct it or to try to think through it properly is there's centuries worth of change. The city has changed a lot over the years. It's been destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, destroyed and rebuilt, and there's centuries of tradition to overcome. So this is from 1894, a book by Carl Bedecker. Jerusalem, the most travelers, is a place of overwhelming interest, but at first sight, many will be sadly disappointed in the dirty modern town with its crooked and badly paved lanes. It is only by patiently penetrating beneath the modern crust of rubbish and decay, which shrouds the sacred places from view, that the traveler will at length realize to himself a picture of the Jerusalem of antiquity. Especially over the last 40 to 50 years, ever since 1967, since the Six-Day War, when the Jews were able to get Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. There's been a lot of archaeological work in certain places in Jerusalem. Obviously, you can't do it in the Muslim quarter unless you want to start World War III. It's just not going to happen. Anytime there's digs anywhere near there, it's a huge problem. A little bit's gone on in the Armenian quarter, and the area in the Christian quarter around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There's been some archaeology there, but most of it's been done in the Jewish quarter. So my first day, I mentioned this earlier, the first day in Jerusalem, I really thought I was walking where Jesus walked, going to the Western Wall, seeing walking the Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and then this is that well I was telling you about, where like 25 feet below me was the first century street. And you go around the corner, you can look even further, all the way down to the time of David, and it's even deeper than that. In fact, that is looking down from that same level that I was just on, looking down there, that's the 4th century street, that's called the Pardo. So that was the Byzantine era Jerusalem. So the 1st century was even lower than that. So there are some obvious differences when you're looking at the modern Old City versus AD 33. Obviously, the temple was there when Jesus was walking around. It's not there now. Now you have that the Dome of the Rock. I'll be honest, it's a beautiful building. When you see the gold dome with the blue sky, it's gorgeous. I cannot stand what it stands for. If I could read Arabic, I could read the blasphemy that's printed all the way around, or written all the way around the outside and on the inside, talking about how God does not have a son and just actually attacking Jesus. So what it stands for is horrible, but the building itself is beautiful. And also has the Al-Aqsa Mosque there on the south end of the Temple Mount, so that's obvious differences. The walls in different locations, I mentioned that. The gates, obviously, the walls are in different spots. Many of the gates are going to be in different spots. For example, in the Bible, or in the modern city, the Dung Gate is right there. But when the Bible talks about the Dung Gate, it's likely way down there by the Pool of Siloam, right by the Valley of Hinnom. So the streets, in some places, are 50 feet higher than what they were in the 1st century. The upper section of the Temple Mount walls have been broken down by the Roman army. So if you look right there at the Western Wall, anything below that red line is original to the 1st century. The stuff above that is repair work. So a lot of that has been knocked over. There were colonnades up above that as well that were pushed down. And you can see some area of the rubble off to the right of this. But that's where the red line was. And underneath that, all the way down to there, are levels that you can take a tour and go down and see that. And you can see that there's the ashlar stones. You can see in what great condition they're in, because they've been covered up for centuries. They have been exposed to the elements. So you can go down there and take a tour, and it goes down like another 40 feet from the platform where the Western Wall. So you can imagine how amazing, how impressive the temple looked when you're approaching it from another 40 feet below. You have these walls that go up even higher with all these, what they call Solomon's colonnade up there, and the temple would be beyond that. It would just be an extraordinary view at that time. So there are a lot of unverifiable sites on the Mount of Olives. Unverifiable meaning some of them did happen there, but we don't know where. So for example, you can go to Gethsemane today. There's this nice little garden with an olive grove and everything. We have no idea if that's where it was in the 1st century. It could have been anywhere on the Mount of Olives. Now there was an oil press near there, but there were other ones on the Mount of Olives as well. So there's just no way to know for sure. The Church of All Nations is right next to the Gethsemane. They say that's where Jesus prayed, and they even claim to have his footprint in the rock there. Okay, I don't think so. Maybe he prayed there, but I don't think that they have his footprint in the rock. They have the church, the Dominus Flevit, where they say that Jesus wept over Jerusalem. We know he wept over Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives. We have, again, no idea where that was on the Mount of Olives. The tomb of the Virgin, so Mary's tomb was right there. Why? I don't know why Mary would be buried in Jerusalem. It doesn't make any sense. She probably would have been in Nazareth. But the Dome of the Ascension, where Christ ascended from, the Church of the Pater Noster, the Our Father, we don't even know if that's where he was teaching them then. The Bible doesn't say that, but they have a church there where the prayer is written in like 40 or 50 different languages on the wall. So, I mean, it's kind of a cool thing, but it's just not, there's no way to know that's where it was. But then we have a lot of sites that are misidentified, things that we know are wrong, and then some that are most likely wrong. This one we know for a fact is wrong. The tomb of Absalom, they call it Absalom's pillar. So looking at the city again, it is right there. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like. So just off the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, that is what they call Absalom's pillar. It does say Absalom set up a monument to himself because he didn't have any sons. He was buried in the forest of Ephraim. Good name, by the way, Ephraim. My grandson's name. So every time I read that now in the Bible, it brings a big smile on my face, whereas I never did before. Not so much about Absalom being buried, that was a sad thing. But, so, he sets up a pillar for himself, but he died in the 10th century BC. That pillar is from the 1st century. That structure is from the 1st century. Okay, it's not Absalom's pillar, but that's what they call it. Same thing with Tomb of Zechariah, we're real close to that. You can see there's supposedly Tomb of Zechariah, there's an Absalom pillar, not really Absalom's. The problem with the Tomb of Zechariah, it's a solid structure, it's not even a tomb. So it's just, certain things get these names because when Crusaders or other groups see something like, oh, that looks like something, who else was alive at this time? Let's call it something after a famous person so that people will come and see it. So that's what happened in some of these cases. The upper room, this one, there's really no way for us to know where that was, and we're not even sure if the upper room that's mentioned in Luke 22 for the Last Supper is the same place as the upper room in Acts, the day of Pentecost. Luke uses different words for them, but they still can be upper rooms of the same house or different houses. We just have no way of knowing that, but in English it just reads the upper room, and so a lot of times we put them together. So if you were to go there today to get a tour, they would show you an area out here just outside the city walls, but that would have been within the city walls in the 1st century. They'll take you to a church that's there, and they'll take you to the upper level, and they'll say this is where that was. That building itself goes back to the Crusader times, so about 1,000 years later. But the first floor includes what they call King David's tomb, which is also misidentified because David was buried in the city of David, that little tiny ridge, not way out on the western side, not there. He wasn't buried out on the western side, but to the east, that little ridge. So that's the wrong thing. There's a 4th century tradition that links that site with the first Christian church in Jerusalem. And it does seem to be an ancient Jewish Christian synagogue, but really there's no way we can know for sure if that's where the upper room was. The house of Caiaphas, there's 4 different places for the house of Caiaphas. They're all mostly in the same area. They're all kind of in this region. One of them is this really cool looking church that was called St. Peter in Gallicantu, which is St. Peter the Cockcrow. That's what that stands for. The House Kiva, which is the unfinished Armenian church, that's right there on the left. You can see that it's unfinished, and it's been that way for many, many years. The other one is right next to that building on the right there. It's near that, and then another one that they're not really identifying where it is. It's just some scholars in the last 10 years have been saying, no, we have another site for it. Fact of the matter is we don't know where it was. There are certain details that have to be described. The Bible described it having a courtyard and everything. And Caiaphas is probably a wealthy man being the high priest and everything. It seems like his house was connected to Annas' house, just because of the description that Jesus was first taken to Annas, and then and there was stuff going on in the courtyard where Peter was being confronted by the servant girl and by other people, and then Jesus is bound and sent to Caiaphas from Annas' house, but the courtyard is still there, and Jesus is able to look right at Peter, like when the cock crows and everything. So that all of that seems to be connected. So we can find those details, but whether or not we've actually found that house, there's no way for us to know yet at this point. So the tomb of Jesus, this is one that gets controversial. So it's according to the Bible, it's near the crucifixion site and in a garden. It was outside the city walls. It was cut out of a stone quarry. It was a rich man's tomb. It had a stone that was able to be rolled, whether that's disc-shaped, which is the way we always picture it, or even plug-shaped, which is how the vast majority of tombs in southern part of Israel were. They're kind of plug-shaped, but those could be rolled, even though they're like a big block. And then it had an outer and inner chamber, and it was a new tomb. So all of those details have to be met. So the two main sites that people think of are the Garden Tomb, which is way up here on the north of the city, of the old city. It's in a very pretty location, nice garden that's there. It's very peaceful. If you go about 100 yards to the east, you can see that hillside. And depending on how you look at it, it sort of looks like a skull. You can kind of see the eyes in there, and then like in the middle, you can kind of see what maybe would look like the nose. Who knows if that's what it looked like 2,000 years ago? Things change. And it doesn't make sense that he would have been crucified on top of a very large hill, because it would have been right by the roadway where people were passing by all the time, rather than where people could stop and talk to him and taunt him, rather than being, 70, 80 feet above them. But the problem with the Garden Tomb, and before I even say this, I wish it was that one. I really do. It's peaceful. It's what I thought of all the time growing up. I always thought of the Garden Tomb. I really wish it was that site, but it's not. It's not a new tomb. That tomb dates back to the Iron Age. It's like a 7th century BC tomb. It would not have been a new tomb at that time. It's not even in the same style as all the rest of the 1st century tombs that we found. So the Bible tells us Joseph of Arimathea put the body of Jesus in his new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. So it's something that was cut in the 1st century, not 700 or 800 years earlier. Professor of Biblical Archaeology Gabriel Barkai made the first archaeological investigation into the Garden Tomb and concluded that it was originally hewn in the Iron Age II, sometime in the 8th or 7th century BC. According to Barkai, Matzar has demonstrated that the area around the Garden Tomb was an extensive cemetery during the Iron Age, and the Garden Tomb is right in the middle of it. So it's not the right one. It matches First Temple tombs, not Second Temple. So it matches things before the city was destroyed in 586 BC, not those in the 1st century. It doesn't have any burial niches, which is what 1st century tombs had. When you walk into it, the other room is to the side. 1st century tombs, when you walk in, the room is beyond it. So you keep on going into it. There's no arcosolium, which is like this little, what do you call it? The thing I bang my head on all the time when you go through doors. So there's like this little thing that's over the top of it. And there's no cone chisel marks, which is how they carved the tombs at that time. You can kind of see them in this one, even though this is a Greek tomb, but you can see how it looks like they had something that would scrape it and would have a bunch of, almost like teeth of a comb. I don't know if you can see that throughout there, but that's what the 1st century tombs look like, and there's nothing like that in the Garden Tomb, because that's not how they chiseled them in the 1st century, or because back when that one was done in the 7th or 8th century, because that's not how they were done. So the other candidate, and the one that makes the most sense by far, even though it's very boisterous and it's got a long history of lots of stuff that is not always the best thing going on there, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is right there. And this building, called the Edicule, is a little inside of it. It's underneath the big dome. Let me show you so that's the Garden Tomb. That is where the Holy Sepulchre is at, and you can kind of see the big dome that's there on the left is kind of like a pewter color. Underneath that is the Edicule. Underneath that, or inside of that, is where the tomb would have been. Now, it's not there anymore because when the city was destroyed by Hadrian in 132, so about 100 years after the crucifixion and resurrection, he wiped that out and built a temple to the pagan gods, to Jupiter and Venus, on the site of a Christian holy place. What Christian holy place would there have been in Jerusalem? Really only one that makes sense, and that's the site of the crucifixion and resurrection, which is where he builds the temple to Jupiter and Venus. And then when 200 years later, when Constantine converts to Christianity, his mother, Helen, comes down to Jerusalem and tries to find that spot, and was told this is where Hadrian built it, so they wiped out the temple of Jupiter and Venus and built the Holy Sepulchre, which has then been destroyed a couple of times and rebuilt. So that spot, there's been archaeological excavations that have taken place there. One just last year that came out that they discovered the soil from the 1st century later actually was a garden. So that fits really well. They also find things going, so everything about that site works. The one thing that some people look at is, if you look at that circle right now, it's inside the city wall. And the Bible says it has to be outside the city wall. Well, it was outside the city wall in AD 33. But in AD 43, about 10 years later, Agrippa had the third wall built around that, so 10 years later it was inside the wall, but at the time of the crucifixion and resurrection, outside the wall. So that site fits all of the details. There's a limestone quarry near the garden, at least 4 tombs on the grounds there. So here's what Joel Kramer said. He's an evangelical Christian archaeologist. Speaking about the location of the Holy Sepulchre, the evidence available to us to authenticate these 2 sacred sites is overwhelming. We can be sure that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre standing today in the old city of Jerusalem marks the place where Jesus died and where he rose again. So that's one that a lot of people get right. A lot of times the Protestants, we don't like it because that's the site the Catholics talk about and the Orthodox talk about. But the garden tomb wasn't really in anybody's mind until the 1880s. They call it Gordon's Calvary. Somebody first mentioned like in the 1840s, but it really wasn't a thing until Gordon wanted to just have an alternative site to the Holy Sepulchre, so like that. It is a lot more peaceful. I still recommend going there if you go to Jerusalem. Can somebody have a very moving spiritual experience thinking about what Jesus did for them by dying on the cross and rising from the dead, even if they're in the wrong spot? Yes. In fact, it can happen here, as you think about those things. So, I'm not saying that those things are all, that it's terrible to have. That's not my point. I think it's good for us to try to think of it correctly. The Via Dolorosa, where you can walk where Jesus carried his cross, that was what I did on the first day, and realized it was completely on the wrong side of town later on. And it would have been much below that as well. So the current route begins at the outside what would have been the Fortress Antonia, that's on the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, and then winds through some streets up to the Holy Sepulchre, passes through the Station of the Cross, and historically there have been longer routes. So this is where it starts, and then you have to go to the Holy Sepulchre. You kind of wind your way around, and they have little markings like this is where Jesus was supposedly judged by Pilate, and then you walk down the street, you can see Via Dolorosa there. You look carefully, the 2 guys and the woman there, that is my mom and my dad and my brother. So I got a picture of them going down my first time I was there. And you can see some young military people there because nearly everybody in Israel serves 2 years in the IDF, and a lot of times they are 18, 19-year-olds carrying around machine guns, and so that's what they do. That's what they need to do. So here's a couple of other stations. So Simon of Cyrene carries the cross there, and a lot of times they have tradition that's built in. So anything that has a Bible verse attached to it, the Bible does mention it. Here's the so-called Station of the Cross. The ones that don't have a Bible verse, they're not in the Bible. It's just tradition that's been attached to it. So Jesus is condemned to death by Pilate. The cross is laid upon Jesus. Jesus falls for this. The Bible never mentions him falling. Did he? Could he? Sure, he might have. In his state, it wouldn't be a surprise at all if he did. He meets the mother who collapsed in shock. That's not in the Bible. Simon of Cyrene, forced to carry the cross. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. No mention of Veronica or anything like that, but that's Catholic tradition. Jesus falls for a second time, again tradition. Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. That isn't Luke. He can tell them about weeping for the city. Jesus falls for the third time, again I mentioned. He's stripped of his garments, nailed to the cross, dies on the cross. Body's taken down to the cross, the body is laid in the tomb. Those last ones are all in there, obviously. So some of the problem with the Via Dolorosa is it's on the wrong side of town. Jesus was tried at Herod's palace, not at the Fortress Antonia. So Herod's palace is where Pilate would stay when he went to town. Herod being Herod the Great, that's why it's named Herod's palace. The other Herod at that time ruled Galilee in the north, and he would come down and stay at the Hadmonian Palace, which is kind of in the center of town. So the trial would have probably been near the hidden gate there, or it could have been just inside of that, on the other side of the courtyard, inside the city. And then they would have marched him to that location. So it's completely the wrong side of town where the modern one is. Again, can somebody contemplate what Jesus did and have a moving experience even in the wrong spot? Yes. So I'm not saying anybody who's ever walked the Via Dolorosa is worth it. Not my point. Just understand the way the city worked at that time. And it was like, same thing's true with what's known as the Ecce Homo arch. This is where Pilate said, "Behold the man." That's right here. You can still see that archway in the city today. The problem is that arch was built about 100 years later after Hadrian conquered the city. It is almost certainly one of Hadrian's triumphal arches. We found two other ones. One just a little bit north of the city, the other one at Gerasa. And they match that style perfectly. They also have niches for idols. Do you think that would have been in the city in Jesus' time? An arch that has cutouts and everything to have idols in it. No, the Jews would have never allowed that. So this is something that was after the city was destroyed. So that's the wrong spot as well. There's a lot of myths that have gone on that people have about the temple itself that I want to kind of go through quickly. So Yasser Arafat, if you remember him, head of the PLO, terrorist, stated that there was no archaeological evidence for Jewish temples on the Temple Mount. He later stated that the ruins of temples don't exist. Okay, well, it is somewhat true that the ruins of the temple don't exist, and that there is, I'm going to say, very little archaeological evidence for the temple itself on Temple Mount. Part of that is because we're not allowed to do excavations on the temple. Another part is those things were completely destroyed and thrown down. Jesus said, "Not one stone will be left on the other." So it was completely destroyed, and things would get reused over time. He says, for 34 years they have dug tunnels, and the most dangerous of which is the Great Tunnel. They found not a single stone proving that the Temple of Solomon was there, because historically the temple was not in Palestine at all. They found only remnants of a shrine of the Roman Herod. He has also found that the temple was once either in Yemen or Nablus. Obviously, he's doing that for political reasons, because he wants to say that Jews have no connection to the land of Israel. But we know for a fact they had a connection to Israel. In fact, Islam has always said the Jews have a connection to Israel. And there's all sorts of sources, even through the last century, that from Muslims saying, yes, we were in this land before. But we have abundant historical and archaeological evidence corroborating the biblical accounts that the temple was there. And most importantly, we have God's word telling us that the Jewish temples were in Jerusalem. So we know that they were. Arafat and other Arab leaders, they developed that to deny Israel the right to the land. And that recent history, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later this week, is very complicated, but you can't honestly deny that there's an ancient Jewish connection to the land. If you do, it's like being a Holocaust denier, it's like denying, I don't know, it's like denying the Packers are the best team in the NFL. No, it's even more serious than that. But it's just a denial of reality. There's another one that's been popular among certain conservative Christians over the last couple of decades, and that's this idea that the temple was built in a different spot, not on the Temple Mount. And all of the experts are wrong. The temple was really located in the city of David, not up here, but down here. I don't want to attack anybody's character because I didn't know these people, but Ernest Martin published a book in 2000 called Temple of Jerusalem Forgotten. He was the first to kind of promote this idea. He passed away shortly after that. Bob Cornuke is still around and still promoting this idea. He had a book called Temple, Amazing New Discoveries that Changed Everything About the Location of Solomon's Temple. Bob Cornuke is also a guy who has claimed to have found Noah's Ark, have seen the Ark of the Covenant, and a lot of other things. And so it just would question what he's saying. I'll show you some other reasons why to question what he's saying on this. All of his books are very similar. They all start off with like this life or death story of him being over there, and it's just so treacherous. And he gets out some crazy, the real Mount Sinai, he supposedly found that as well. And somehow he gets away when it didn't look like anything that he was ever going to be able to. And then the rest of the book he tells you, don't listen to the experts, they're all wrong. You have to listen to what I'm telling you. Look, I'm not saying you should blindly trust experts. You should always have a healthy skepticism of just about everything that we come across. We should verify everything in Scripture. But there are reasons why they are experts. A lot of times they do know what they're talking about, more so than somebody who was never trained in any of the relevant fields. So here is a 3D model of the city of Jerusalem. You see the Temple Mount there, the big structure on the bottom. And here's the traditional view. So you have in the pinkish color, that's the Temple Mount with the temple. The blue is Fortress Antonia. And what they are claiming is that the big structure that you just saw in all pink is really just the Fortress Antonia. All of that, this huge, they say, this Roman fort to house a whole legion. There was no legion in Jerusalem at that time, but they claim there was. And then the temple was really built over the city of David on this huge platform that doesn't exist anymore, built on top of other structures that still are there from the 1st century and before that, going back to the 10th century, and even before that. Somehow they didn't destroy that with a structure this big. Just in case you want to know how big this structure would be, this is based on Ernest Barton's book. Cornu makes it smaller. But just to give you an idea of how big that structure would be, and there's no evidence whatsoever of it, that's the Great Pyramid of Giza inside of it. It would be twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which was the largest building in the world up until the last century. You want to tell me that they built something twice that size in Jerusalem? It would have dammed up the Kidron Brook, which would have caused a huge lake back behind there. They had a garbage dump in the 1st century beneath there. Your ideas have to match reality. And this one doesn't. It's impossible. Now, I mentioned Cornu makes it a smaller one that still would put it on top of other things, but they're doing all sorts of distortions with the text in order to make it work. They claim, Martin claimed that he reached his conclusion about the temple location after reading the eyewitness account of Eleazar. So Cornu said the same thing. He's just getting his ideas from Martin. Called Eleazar a very important eyewitness to the events described in this book. Who was Eleazar? Well, he was the rebel he led the rebels who fled to Masada at the start of the Jewish-Roman War in AD 66, when the war broke out. They fled to Masada. And then, so they were not in Jerusalem when it was destroyed. So they're not eyewitnesses to what's going on there. So when the thing that they're writing about, that they're claiming he was an eyewitness to, he wasn't even an eyewitness. Not only that, Josephus, who records that speech, never would have heard that speech. He was with the Roman army outside the walls of Masada, and by the time the Roman army got in there, everybody was dead, because that's the place where the Jewish holdouts, the rebels that were there, had decided to, like a suicide pact, they would kill each other, and then the last person would kill himself. And they didn't want to be killed by the Romans. So Josephus writes this big speech by Eleazar the night before they're killed. He never would have even heard it. Now, there were a couple women that survived inside of a cistern. Maybe they would have relayed that to him. But he's not an eyewitness. And he wasn't talking about the Temple Mount. He was talking about Herod's palace. So all of that stuff is just completely wrong when they put that in their book. They repeatedly misuse or ignore what the Bible teaches on the subject. Here is how Bob Cornu quotes 2 Chronicles 3:1 every single time in his book, 4 different times, every single time in his documentaries on the subject, every time he promotes it in churches. I watch presentations. Here's what he says, 2 Chronicles 3:1. Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor for him, the Jebusite. Notice those 3 little dots in the middle, right? That's an ellipsis, meaning I'm cutting information out of here. Which is okay to do if it's just a bunch of superfluous information. If it's not something that's adding to your point at all. It's not okay if it's the only verse in the entire Bible that tells you exactly where Solomon built the temple. On Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father. The one verse that tells you exactly where they built the temple, he cuts those words out of his book. That is deceptive. And that's why you should not trust people like that. Ernest Martin never even cites that verse in his 500-page book. Not once. He has a whole chapter on where did Solomon build the temple. He doesn't quote the Bible once in that chapter. And yet there's a verse that tells us exactly where it is. So they do all sorts of other problems. They ignore the archaeology. They refuse to engage with the abundance of scholarly work against their position. Anybody know what this is? Probably not. It's the Sorigan version. We found 2 of these. It's written in Greek. And there were signs on the Temple Mount that between the court of the Gentiles and going beyond that, Gentiles were not permitted past this one partition. And they had signs along the way that said, if you pass this, you are going to be put to death. That's what that sign was. We found 2 of those. The Roman general Titus referenced those. He talked about them being engraved in Greek characters, warning foreigners not to move beyond them upon penalty of death. Josephus says that no foreigner should go within that sanctuary. So those things are written about historically. We found 2 of them. Where do we find them? You would think it's going to be down in the city of David, right? If that's where these guys are right. No, they were found not there, but up there. How did they roll hundreds of feet uphill and around a 37-acre platform to end up on the north side of the Temple Mount? They didn't. Because the big thing there is the Temple Mount. How about this? This is the trumpeting stone. It says to the place of trumpeting. That's what is written in Hebrew. So there's my group when we were there in 2022. And right behind us, we're touching the trumpeting stone there. It's right at the, you can see that edge of that building. That is the southeast corner, or southwest corner of the Temple Mount. So it is right, not over there, which is where it should be if corner is right. It's right there, the southwest corner. So that stone, Josephus talked about how they would, at the new moon, they would go to the corner and blow trumpets to announce the new moon. They found the stone that references that in the right spot, not in the city of David. Anyways, I wrote a few articles detailing this. Somebody asked me if I've got any new books. I've been working on one to refute this stuff because there's a lot more to it. But I'm kind of got stuck about a year ago and stopped. I had a bunch of other things, but I do want to finish that before we finish the Jerusalem model. But you can look at those on Answers in Genesis website. There's one that's kind of an introduction, then one detailed one that goes through all of the main arguments. But they have dozens of ritual baths all around the Temple Mount, because before Jews could go up there, they had to bathe in a mikvah. And they have so many of them right around the Temple Mount that they even have a mikvah tour, like this trail tour that you can walk. There's so many of them around there. Not in the city of David, but up there around the Temple Mount. You can see that. You can go down one side, they have this partition in the middle of the steps. And you go down one side, you come up the other side clean. So those are all over the place. And anyways, enough with the wrong spots. Let me end it by talking about some good things, things that are the right things, things that we have found. So if you're wondering if there's any archaeology that supports what I've already covered a lot, but the Caiaphas ossuary, this is Joseph ben Caiaphas is the high priest at the time of Jesus. He's the one who put Jesus on trial, the second trial that night. We found his bone box in the forest of Peace, about a mile south of the old city, and it's even engraved Joseph ben Caiaphas, Joseph the son of Caiaphas. So that's pretty cool. We found Hezekiah's wall that we mentioned in 2 Chronicles 32:5. He's the one that expanded the city westward. What happened is that the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. The people who were fleeing were coming to Jerusalem. There were so many people coming into Jerusalem that Hezekiah built this wall. Well, there it is. We found that dating back to the 8th century BC. It's right about there, that little section I just showed you. So Hezekiah's tunnel, which was this monumental feat in order to think about digging this tunnel underground from one side and from the other back in the day when they didn't have ground penetrating radar or anything, and to meet right in the middle. It's pretty extraordinary. And they were able to do that. No, I did not walk this. I'm not going to walk underground in an area like this for about 30 minutes and maybe get stuck. If it was smaller, maybe I would do it, but a lot of people do. I'm just not going to go in there. I did see the beginning of it. We found Hezekiah's bule, like this seal, and Isaiah is like 10 feet away. That's pretty cool because Isaiah and Hezekiah talked regularly. And so we find one that is, we found several for Hezekiah. That's one on the left there. And the one on the right says Isaiah the prophet. Well, the last letter in Hebrew is missing from the word prophet. But we can be pretty sure that's exactly what it said. So, yeah, that's just more archaeological confirmation from Jerusalem that all the things the Bible talks about in Jerusalem were taking place there. The archaeologist there, Eli Shukran, believes he may have found what the location where Melchizedek would have been worshiping God. So he called it Temple Zero. That would have been in the city of David, because that was all that city was at that time. And so he found an area that looks like it was a site for worship there. Then, if you think about Jerusalem, it is the most important events in human history have occurred in or near that city. Speaking of Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, but so many other things we read about in Scripture, about the time of David, or even some part of Abraham's life. You have Solomon, and throughout that period, so many things taking place in Jerusalem. The New Testament revolves around Jesus is going to return where? On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, and he'll go out and fight for Jerusalem. That's what it tells us in Zechariah. So it is the focal point of the world most of the time. Think about like the United Nations. Nearly all of their condemnations are against one tiny little country the size of New Jersey. Over and over again, they have more condemnations of Israel than all the other countries put together. Every year they do that. And yet it's the only democracy in the entire Middle East. It's the one that has freedom and rights for people in the Middle East. The other ones don't. But that's the one that's always attacked. That's always the focal point. And it will be going forward, I believe. So Jesus said, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and discourage and crucify, and the third day he will rise again." Well, that is where it happened, in Jerusalem. So we're building a model from that time to bring it to life for people, and to help them understand not just the things I shared in this presentation, but to really dig into their Bible and learn more about the culture, more about the time of what it was like, and ultimately to share the gospel in a pretty unique way. So that's our next big project, and I finished right on time, 1 minute long. Well, actually, I think he said I have an hour 15, so I got time for some Q&A if you want. Otherwise, you got to put up my jokes again. I can tell you one, but then just you have to promise not to call my HR department. All right, and you have to promise no matter what I say, you cannot get mad. Everybody agree? Yes? Anybody not agree? Okay. Nobody can get offended at this joke. I should not do this. I really should not. Okay. But I'll do it. Anybody know why Helen Keller was such a bad driver?
Blind spot?
Because she was a woman. I told you, can I get mad at me? Notice all the guys like. All right. I wanted to tell you a joke like that, but now you're going to be like, okay, I don't want to hear more jokes. I'll ask a question. So. Yeah, my wife would be I'm glad she's not here. She would let me hear it for that one. All right. No, yeah, go ahead.
Whereabouts is Golgotha?
Yes, let me go back to the map. So that would be the place of the skull, and let's see. So the debate is like between the Garden Tomb and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So that's where almost there. There. So the one on the top of the Garden Tomb, that's the one that I showed a picture of first. So that's I think it's very unlikely, even though I like that spot a lot better. It is really a beautiful place. It's a little bit outside the hustle and bustle of everything. But the one, the circle that's a little bit lower, that's where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. It's loud, boisterous. They've had, over the centuries, they've had times where people have been trampled to death in there. They've had, I mean, it's just, it's such a unique place. There's a ladder that's up there that you can see that they cannot move because it's run by a bunch of different Christian denominations, and every single one of them have to be in agreement before, so it's just decided that's going to stay there. It's been there for, I think, centuries, maybe just decades, but it's not going to move. Ever since the 1200s, there is a person from a Muslim family who has to unlock the door. It's been their tradition. So every morning, this guy from this long line of Arabs will get up each morning, walk over there, and unlock the door so people can go into the Holy Sepulchre. And So they're relying on a Muslim, and it's kind of unique. It's a strange history, but yeah, it's as a Protestant who is used to church buildings like this, where we don't have all sorts of baubles and all sorts of icons and stuff all over the place. It just looks really gaudy. It feels weird walking into the Holy Sepulchre because you have all of that stuff, but it doesn't make it the wrong spot just because I don't like how it looks on the inside. It is most likely the right spot. But good question. And in there, all I mentioned was the side of the tomb. As you walk in there, if you go to the left, the bigger dome that you're under, that's where the tomb site is. If you look at it's kind of hard to see in the picture. I can see it here because I'm close to it. But there's another dome that's a little bit smaller kind of to the right, which would be to the east. That is right over the spot of the crucifixion. And so they have like a recreation and mock-up. They have Jesus on the cross in there at that spot. I couldn't get a good picture of last time they were doing construction there.
So the tomb and the Golgotha is not far apart.
What's that?
So the tomb where they laid Jesus is not far from...
Yeah, it's very close. Which is what the Bible says. Near that spot there was a garden in which there was a tomb, Joseph Arimathea's tomb. So it was very close. And they found 4 tombs in that site. They found a quarry in there. So it matches the description that the Bible has very well. Is it possible that it's somewhere different? I think within the realm of possibility, but as far as traditional sites go, this one is one of the ones we've got nailed down pretty well. So. But I would recommend going to both if you ever get to go over there. But if you can't go there, come back in about 2 years to the Ark Encounter and you'll get to see it. And it's going to sound strange, but in some ways it'll be better than going to Jerusalem as far as understanding the city. Now, you're not going to get a walk from Pool of Siloam and go up 600 feet. Some of you are like, well, good, I don't want to go up 600 feet, that's a lot. But you will go up 6 feet because ours is a 1 to 100 scale, so everything about it, the topography, all of that is going to match. So you'll get a good feel for it, and you'll get to see what the city looked like at that time, as best we can tell. I should have shown you that we have in our studio. We have all of the archaeological excavations mapped out, everything that they found where the walls, so everything they have found we're putting in, but that's only about 10 to 15% of the city. The rest of it is guesswork. But it's educated guesswork. So you can rely on some historical writings. You can tell that the hillside, kind of hard to tell. Can you guys see this white dome right in the middle there? Kind of hard to tell, but that's the Herbicide Rock. So if you go a little bit to the right of that, you're on this really steep slope overlooking the Temple Mount. That's where we found the palatial mansion. We found a bunch of really large homes right there. That's probably the rich area of town because that's where you have the best views. You're overlooking the temple. And then we found a few rich homes there. There's probably several more. So we can make educated guesses about what else is right there. You can rely on some of Josephus' description of certain things, and then some areas are going to be older, maybe a little more rundown. But the level of detail our guys are putting into it, even to the amount of which sides of the building gather more mold in Jerusalem, depending on what kind of stone was used in that place. All of that is being taken into account. It's so crazy. If I think about it, I'll grab a couple of pictures of some of the pieces that we've already finished and try to drop that in so you can see it later. It's really cool. I'm super excited about it. So what you got there was like a little snippet of my dissertation. That's what I got to write on. I enjoyed it. I know some people are bored by it, but I thought it was cool. Yes?
So if you go to the Ark, can you just get a ticket to see the Jerusalem display?
Well, currently it's not open yet. We're still a couple of years away. I don't think it's going to work that way. Maybe there will be something like that. My guess is there are going to be a lot of university professors who are going to rent it out at night for their classes to teach there. We're going to have something where we'll have like 3 big monitors up above the middle of it. And I think you can see that in one of the first pictures. That way, if somebody can give a presentation standing right down in the middle, you can use a little laser pointer to point things. That can have your PowerPoint up above you, so everybody can be lying around the outside to watch the presentation. So I'm hoping to give some of those once we start. But I don't know if you'll be able to buy it just for that. It'll probably be part of the entire. Oh, I had a lot of slides to go through. Almost there. Should just close this. There we go. So you can see the monitors up at the top above with 3 pieces of the model. We're cutting it in 3 pieces, which is strange. You can see how you can walk through the middle of it. But when you have a model that's as big as this room, and probably a little wider, if you're standing back this far looking at something in the middle, you're not really seeing detail. And so the one in Jerusalem, it is cool, but it's like twice the size of this thing. And you don't get to walk through the middle. In fact, if you want to see the middle, you might as well get your binoculars out, take your phone out and zoom in as much as you can. And there's no life in it. There's no vegetation, there's no people, there's nothing for scale. And everything made out of the same little stone, except for some roof tiles are different, and the Temple Mount has some different stuff on it. But everything else is just the same stuff. It's still a cool model, but it's not going to be like what we're doing. So people, whenever I tell them what we're working on, they're like, "Oh, have you seen the one in Israel?" And I really just want to say, "Yeah, that's cute." I'm not going to say that. And for a while, when we first started marketing ours, our team kept trying to make it sound like, the best one ever. And it's like we were competing. It's like, guys, stop doing that. We're working with them. They're helping us make it as good as possible. We want them to go to both. So at first they're like, the biggest one not the biggest one. The biggest indoor one. No, it's not. There's one in Rio that's an exact duplicate of the one in Jerusalem, but it's made out of wood. So you keep, they always wanted to have like the biggest. No, it'll be the best. How about we should go with that? It'll be the most accurate, most up to date. That's good enough for me.
All right. What do you plan to speak on the next nights?
If I finish one by tomorrow night, what I want to do is, I was talking to Pastor about it a little bit ago. There are a lot of Christians that have talked about the church replacing Israel, like they claim that we're the true Israel, the new Israel, or something. That is not what I don't think about teach that for a second. So I'll cover a little bit of that, but really, what I really want to do is kind of cover the way that even some Christians who don't believe that accidentally kind of promote that. I'll give you a little hint. Like a lot of churches, we talk about how come forward to the altar. There's an altar in our churches. Are we offering sacrifices up here or anything? We don't have altars, but you know what I'm talking about, right? A lot of churches will use that sort of language. And if we almost kind of incorporate Old Testament, Old Covenant stuff into and kind of take that terminology and reinterpret it, and in a way we're opening people up to that idea that, oh, you know what, the church is just taking Israel's place. And yeah, the Bible is very clear that that's not the case. And so now I'll cover, so within that I want to show how certain terms have been redefined just to explain that, and for people to justify doing that. That'll be one night. We gotta look at the list that Amanda sent me. She, do you remember what's the relevance of Genesis? That might be my last, because Friday night's usually a bit shorter. So I think that would be Friday night, the relevance of Genesis, which is one I gave here several years back. And I might do one that's kind of a combination of what the kids are learning this week. You guys know about that already, but I'll try to condense 5 of them into 5 25-minute ones into one session and pull out stuff that you guys already that are like pretty obvious. So I might do that one night too. And then do you remember what one of the other ones was? What's that? It might be. I'll take a look. I've got the email. I've been so crazy busy. I figured I'd be working on it throughout the day. It's nice to have a nice quiet place during the day. So I'll be working on PowerPoint, try to get it ready. And then
you have,
next week
did you have something to do with talk on like Christianity and wokeism?
I think that was one of the other ones, right?
Yeah.
Yes. And I gave that one a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I gave one, and I think I think that might have been on the list, so I can definitely do that one again. And talk about some of the things that we're covering in our radiance exhibit too. We're addressing that. So, yeah, I think that would be another one.
What was the atmosphere of the people in Jerusalem while you were there?
The what?
The people in Jerusalem.
What about them?
Yeah, what was the atmosphere, you know, of the people there while you were there? Were they-
Oh, okay, well, okay. I was thinking like,
Because there's like-
in the biblical time, what do you mean the atmosphere of the people?
No, I meant while you were in Jerusalem. You know?
Yeah, I mean, they're usually shorter, so they have more atmospheric pressure than I do. For a lot of them, like what we would look at as being the ultra-Orthodox or something like that, a lot of times they'll just completely ignore you. Even if you want to strike up a conversation, they're not really interested. And it's not just because you're a tourist, they just don't really want to talk to anybody except for people within their own group. When I was there in 2017 and also in 22, most people were friendly, especially as you're walking around the old city of Jerusalem. Even if you're in the Muslim quarter, most of them are shop owners and they want your business, so they're going to be nice to you. They might haggle with you a little bit and try to get you to buy that stuff. You got to learn how to say no. But otherwise they were friendly. It looks like they're all lined up, so I should probably wrap it up. We're all set?
Are they out here?
Well, half of them.
Yeah, whenever you're done, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the only time there was any sort of that we ever felt threatened was the time I was there in 22. We walked, they called it the Rampart Walk. You can walk on top of the walls. And we're on the north side of the city and then we're on the south side of the city. We went on the north side first, and as we got around to the eastern part, which is the Muslim quarter, there were some kids playing in this parking lot area. And one of them kind of ran over to us. He was probably like 12 or 13, kind of stuck his hand through the rail and was like waving to us. I don't know if he wanted me to give him like a high five or something, but I decided I probably shouldn't do that, so I just said hi. And we walked by and suddenly we heard this loud noise and like glass breaking, and heard something hit right next to us, and there were 4 of us on the wall, and I said, guys, run. And they were throwing rocks and bottles at us. And one of the bottle exploded right next to my friend Travis, and like just a little piece of it hit him in the arm, and he had just like a little pinprick of blood. And that was the only injury we got from it, but it could have been a lot worse. We didn't do anything to him. It's just when you're raised in a way that tells you you have to hate these people no matter what, or it could have just been kids being kids. You know, sometimes you have teenagers do stupid things here too. But, other than that, they were always pretty friendly, or just kept to themselves. But I want to go back. I was supposed to go back in December 23. Obviously, something happened 2 months earlier that made that so that didn't happen. And I was hoping to go back this December. I'm on a list to go if my school goes. I got to get pictures from, see where the 25 monitors are? I got to go there with a 360 camera, get like a 90-second video from each spot just in that area, so you can watch that on the monitor. So here's what the city looks like today, and you can kind of move it around and explore what the city looks like in that spot. So that's one of the things I want to do, plus actually go on a real tour. Both times I went as self-guided. So. All right, well I'll wrap it up there, and take over.